And lastly, Lori, this one's for you because I know you're so interested in Iraq, as are many of you. Yesterday, our Deputy Secretary, John Sullivan, met with Iraq's Deputy Foreign Minister, Nazar Haraya. I hope I got that right. The Deputy Secretary congratulated the Deputy Foreign Minister on the battle against ISIS and discussed future cooperation on economic, commercial, cultural, and humanitarian initiatives. During the meeting, the Deputy Secretary emphasized our commitment to the long-term partnership between the United States and Iraq, which is grounded in the U.S.-Iraq Strategic Framework Agreement. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions. Let's move on. Lori, do you have something more?
Iraq, yes.
How about that? I had a special topper just for you today.
That's a first. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
We try.
Okay, and I want to follow up on that topper. The Kurdish Prime Minister, Nechervan Barzani, complained today that the talks with Baghdad, which you, the KRG, you've repeatedly called for, have not even started. So in the Deputy Secretary's meeting with the Iraqi Deputy Foreign Minister, was there any discussion of when those talks would begin?
Well, those talks would have to be agreed to between the Iraqi central government and also between the Kurds. So I'm not sure that they would commit to us that those talks will begin on a certain date. But we continue to call upon the government of Iraq to sit down with the Kurds and have a conversation about this.
But the Prime Minister of the government of Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, said, we want these talks to begin, and Baghdad is doing nothing.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about that?
We feel, first of all, it's not the place of the U.S. government to force these talks to happen, but we do firmly believe that that is the right thing to do and it should happen. So we just continue to call on the government of Baghdad and also the Kurds to sit down and have a conversation together. We are willing to certainly help facilitate talks, but we would have to be asked by the governments to do that.
Has the Iraqi government asked you
Not
yet?
to my knowledge.
So what is your view then, the Kurdish leadership, Prime Minister Barzani and Deputy Prime Minister Talabani visited Paris, they met with the French president. What is your view of that diplomacy? Do you regard that as helpful?
Well, I think all diplomacy of the sorts is helpful. Certainly France has a responsibility and forces serving in the region. They're a part of the de-ISIS coalition. I think it's certainly important that the Iraqi government would sit down and talk with Mr. Macron.
On Russia and Syria,
Yes.
and I feel a little bit like I'm doing a Matt Lee imitation of his questions
Well,
to
you
John
do. You
Kirby.
two do sometimes.
But poor John Kirby regularly got hammered by Matt. And the question of why do you think the Geneva process that you're attached, that you're supporting is going to work when you don't have the forces on the ground to back up that diplomacy, whereas the Russians have a much bigger presence there and the Syrian government's gaining ground. So just now, the Syrians walked out of the Geneva talks and they said they're not coming back. Why do you think that the Geneva process is going to work if it is not fully supported by the Russians and the Syrians aren't present?
Well, look, I think ultimately the Geneva process is something that many countries have agreed to, that is the best, most workable process. Has it been successful fully yet? No, not necessarily, but more and more countries are agreeing that the Geneva process, as Russia has said, is the way to go, is the political process forward for Syria. That political process will be very long. As you know, we are still trying to, the United States and the coalition, are still trying to stabilize that country. Eventually, we think that with all of the people involved in this, that we will be able to get to that point. Eventually, Syrians themselves will have a voice. We believe that a democracy or some sort of more free type society will win at the end of the day.
Do you think Moscow will agree to a diplomatic process which is going to see the end of Bashar al-Assad's rule in Syria?
Well, we have long said that we don't believe that the Syrian people ultimately will want to support Bashar al-Assad in office. One of the things that could be done is the Syrian people who have been pushed out to other countries, who are refugees elsewhere, that they could have a chance to vote. Imagine if you had all the people who are still in Syria plus the diaspora voting. Would they vote back in Bashar al-Assad, the man who's responsible for killing so many men, women, and children? I doubt that. This will ultimately be up to the Syrian people to decide once they get to that point.
And Russia agrees to that process?
I believe that Russia had said recently, and we'll double check this, but I believe that Russia had said just recently that they would support the Geneva process. So let me just double check on that for you.
Who represented the U.S. at the last Geneva session?
We had one of our colleagues there. I've not met her yet. Stephanie Williams was one of our colleagues who was represented there. We go there more as an observer, a handholder of sorts.
Right, but that's what the previous administration did too. They just did it at a much higher level.
Well, you know what? We're at an entirely different place. We are at a place where Raqqa has been liberated. We are in a much better position. And when I say we, I just mean the coalition. A much better position in having defeated ISIS and having a ceasefire that's held since the summer. We are in a much better position in Syria now than I think this country has.
Wouldn't it make sense then to leverage that much better position by sending more senior people, say the secretary himself or the deputy?
We have long been clear with the governments involved and the coalition that the United States has in large part pulled together. There is no question about our commitment to the Geneva process, and there's no question about our commitment to trying to get a safe, stable, and peaceful Syria. I can't imagine anybody would actually question that. Okay?